My name is Emma Caldwell, and I'm 27 years old. I grew up in the small, snow-covered town of Millstone, Vermont, where winters came early, and Christmas came with a kind of magic that most folks in bigger cities forgot about. My father was a mechanic. My mother ran a seamstress shop out of our front porch. We never had much, but we always had love. When I moved to Providence, Rhode Island, it was to chase something bigger, a life where I didn't have to stretch every dollar. And for a while, I thought I had it. I worked my way up from assistant to personal secretary at Hargrove Textiles, one of the oldest clothing distributors in New England. It was a family-run business then, led by a man named Walter Hargrove, who treated me like the daughter he never had. But time changed everything. Walter died in the spring of '47, and by that summer, his nephew Bradley Hargrove had taken over. Bradley was young, handsome, and cruel in the way a polished man can be. He had a laugh that sounded like money and eyes that scan a room like he already owned it. He noticed me one morning by the stairwell. I was carrying fabric rolls, my cheeks red from the cold. He smiled, touched my elbow, and asked my name. I should have known then. Men like him never notice girls like me unless they're looking for something temporary. By Thanksgiving, we were secretly seeing each other. You're not like the others, Emma, he'd whisper into my ear as we lay tangled in his apartment above the showroom. You see the world like I do. I believed him. Because when a man you love tells you he sees a future with you, you want to see it too. Then came the Christmas Eve party at the office. The champagne was flowing, the tree was lit with gold ribbon, and I wore a dress I had stitched together. Myself forest green velvet, just off the shoulder. I thought he'd announce us. I thought he'd finally tell the team we were together. Instead, he introduced someone else, Clarissa Maddox, the daughter of a wealthy investor. I'd like you all to meet my fiancé, Bradley said, raising a glass. The world shifted. The room blurred. My heart shattered. And then, like some cruel joke, they handed out employee gifts. I unwrapped mine with shaking hands. Inside the envelope was a $1 million gift card, a promotional stunt for a partnership with a new department store chain. They laughed as if it were all in good humor. A big number for a poor girl, a showpiece, a joke. Bradley met my eyes across the room and raised his eyebrows. I stood still, gripping the card. I didn't cry, not that night, but the next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my small apartment, legs folded, the fireplace burning low, holding that gift card in my lap like it was a ticking clock. I stared at it until the sun rose, red light breaking through the frost-covered window pane. A $1 million gift card. It looked official, gold-trimmed, embossed with the name Windcrest Department Stores, but I knew what it really was: a cruel joke wrapped in corporate velvet, a stunt, a PR gimmick, a disposable laugh at my expense, and I had been disposable, too. Bradley had taken what he wanted from me: my trust, my heart, my loyalty, and then tossed me aside like a crumpled invitation. He thought I was a secretary with no options, a small town girl with big eyes and no spine. He was wrong. By midday Christmas morning, I had a plan. I put on my boots, packed up the card, and took a train straight to Boston, where Windcrest's headquarters was located. The train was half empty. Most folks were home opening presents or drinking cider. I was sharpening my revenge with every stop we passed. The Windcrest receptionist nearly turned me away, young, cheery, with a name tag that read June. I waited, patiently, until someone from the finance floor overheard me mention the amount on the card. $1 million? He repeated. Are you sure it isn't misprinted? No, I said. It's one of 100 that were printed for a private equity holiday stunt. I'd like to redeem it in cash. That raised a few eyebrows. A few phone calls later, I was sitting across from a man in suspenders and rimmed spectacles named Mr. Nathaniel Reese, the director of finance. He was middle-aged, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense tone. Miss Caldwell, he said, tapping the card on the table. This isn't your average store credit. These were backed by real capital, liquid too. It was part of a buy-in campaign with Hargrove Textiles. $1 million per card, locked in short-term accounts. I nodded. So it's not just ink. There's real money behind this? He stared at me. You understand, he said carefully, if you were to liquidate this, you could make moves. I planned, I said. He sat back and crossed his arms. Most folks would go shopping. I smiled. I'm not most folks. It took 2 more days of signatures, meetings, and approvals, but on December 28th, The funds hit a private account I set up under the name EC Holdings. I had liquid cash, and I had a motive. That was all I needed. Now, you might ask what a 27-year-old seamstress knows about business takeovers. You'd be surprised. I spent 5 years working under Walter Hargrove. I read every internal memo. I sat in on calls he didn't realize I was listening to. I watched how the money moved, who held the debts, who bought favors, who kept the company barely breathing, and I knew one thing very clearly. Hargrove Textiles was hanging by a thread. Bradley didn't know it, but he had made one massive mistake that month. He had sold a portion of the company's future inventory and brand rights just to cover the holiday bonuses. It was a desperate move, and he didn't even read the fine print, but I did. That week, I contacted the silent investor who bought the rights, an aging widow named Mrs. Laurette Brandt, who lived alone in a house full of cats in New Haven. You say you want to buy me out? She said over tea. Why would a girl like you care about a dying mill? I looked her in the eye. Because it's not dying. It's drowning under the wrong captain. I can fix it. She watched me closely. And what do you get? Control, I said. And closure. She didn't ask for more. By December 30th. EC Holdings owned 51% of Hargrove Textiles. The paperwork was filed. The ink was drying. All I had to do now was wait for New Year's Eve. The morning of December 31st, Providence wore a coat of fresh snow. The streets glistened with frost, and every window pane along Market Street was lined with garland and gold bells. People were laughing, running errands for last-minute champagne, scribbling wishes onto napkins. But not me. I was walking into Hargrove Textiles, the building I used to enter quietly, on time, invisible, obedient. But today, I walked through the doors like I owned the place, because now, I did. The receptionist looked up, startled, her mouth forming a question, but she said nothing when she saw my stride. I didn't wear my usual modest wool coat. I wore a gray velvet jacket with silver buttons and high leather boots that clicked like declarations on the tiled floor. I wasn't Emma the assistant anymore. I was Emma Caldwell, majority stakeholder. I took the stairs, not the elevator. I wanted to feel every step of this climb, wanted my heels to echo in the hallways that once swallowed my silence. On the third floor, Bradley's office sat at the far end, a glass box of arrogance. Through the frosted glass, I could see him laughing with Clarissa Maddox, the heiress he'd chosen over me. She perched on the edge of his desk like she belonged there, all pearls and pale pink silk. He wore a navy suit likely tailored in New York. I knocked once, then pushed the door open. Emma, Bradley stood. What on earth are you doing here? Clarissa blinked at me, her smile polite and venomous. I came to attend the staff meeting, I said, lifting a folder from my bag. I believe the shareholders were invited? Bradley's face froze for a half second before stretching into a performative smile. Of course, though I didn't realize the secretary pool was buying shares now. Oh, I said, smiling faintly. You didn't hear? I placed the folder on his desk. Inside were notarized documents, purchase agreements, stock acquisitions, and the deed transfer from Mrs. Brandt. Bradley opened the first page, then the second, then paled. What is this? That, I said, is a list of everything you didn't read before signing those brand rights away. And that, I flipped to the last page, makes me your new boss. He stared at the signature. EC Holdings, Emma Caldwell Holdings, I said. I liquidated your $1 million joke and made it my down payment. You underestimated me, Bradley. That was your second mistake. He was silent. Clarissa stood, confused. Brad, what does this mean? It means, I said, Hargrove Textiles is now under new management. I'll be holding a staff meeting in the main hall at noon. You're both welcome to attend. I turned and walked out without another word. At noon, the staff gathered, factory floor supervisors, designers, clerks, all dressed for celebration but whispering in confusion. I stood at the head of the main hall, the old pine tree still glowing. In the corner behind me, some of you know me, I said. Some of you worked beside me. I was a girl with a clipboard and coffee tray. But today, I stand before you not as your colleague, but as your new executive director. The room hushed. I've purchased controlling interest in this company. Starting Monday, we will begin restructuring. Salaries will be reviewed. Wasteful contracts will be terminated, and priority will return to quality and people, not profits. And parties, a voice in the back asked. What about Mr. Hargrove? Mr. Hargrove, I said, and his fiancée will be stepping down. effective immediately. The doors opened behind me. Bradley stood frozen in the entrance, red-faced, papers clutched in his hand. Clarissa wasn't with him this time. You can't just yes, I can, I said, my voice calm. And I did. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some clapped. One of the older women near the front wiped tears from her eyes. I remembered her, Mrs. Graves, the payroll clerk who once shared her lunch with me when I forgot mine. Bradley looked at me like he didn't recognize who I was. Maybe he didn't. He had known Emma, the girl. Not Emma, the woman who could rise from betrayal and take back everything with fire in her veins. I left the building that afternoon to the sound of cheers. Outside, snow was falling again. But this time, it felt warm against my skin. That night, as the city counted down the seconds to midnight, I sat by my fireplace in Millstone. My parents were asleep, unaware of the fire I had lit in the world outside. The radio hummed with soft jazz, and I raised a glass of cider to the flames. To love, I said, to lies, and to starting over. The days after New Year's passed in a blur of signatures, whispers, and hushed meetings behind closed doors. Word spread through the textile industry like smoke. Bradley Hargrove had been overthrown by a girl from the office. Some called it scandal, some called it poetic justice. I didn't care what they called it. I was too busy turning smoke into strategy. Bradley, of course, didn't go quietly. He came back 3 days later with his lawyer Harold Langford, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from driftwood. This won't hold, Emma, Bradley hissed as he stormed into the boardroom, slamming papers on the table. You bought broken pieces. You'll bleed cash in 3 months. I might, I replied coolly. But I'd rather bleed building something I believe in than rot under someone who treats people like furniture. He sneered. This isn't personal. It's business. No, I said, standing slowly. You made it personal when you used me. You made it personal when you gave me $1 million joke for Christmas and kissed another woman under mistletoe. Langford adjusted his spectacles and mumbled something about contracts being binding. I handed him a second folder. I had a second clause reviewed. I told him. Bradley's sale of brand rights wasn't just careless, it was exploitable. His signatures tied to reckless borrowing make him personally liable. If he doesn't leave quietly, I'll press forward with charges of mismanagement and intentional defrauding of stakeholders. Langford went pale. Bradley's face turned a shade I can only describe as boiling wine. He stood, clenching his fists. You think this makes you powerful? He spat. You're a secretary with lucky timing and a grudge. I smiled. That's what you think. But I'm the secretary who just turned your empire into mine. By week's end, he was gone. He left a single note on his desk, scrawled in ink. You'll never keep it afloat. Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe Hargrove Textiles was too broken to survive. But I had plans, and more than that, I had purpose. I knew every bolt of fabric that passed through our doors. I knew what sold and what didn't. I knew the names of the floor workers, their kids, their routines. Bradley only knew their names when it was time to fire someone. A week later, I got a letter postmarked from upstate New York, addressed in cursive. It was from Clarissa Maddox. Emma, I'm not writing to apologize. I never owed you anything. But you should know Bradley lied to both of us. He said you were nothing, that you begged him for scraps. I guess now we both know who was begging whom. I left him, not because of you, but because I saw what he really was. You were the mirror that showed it. I wish you luck. Clarissa. I folded the letter and tucked it in my coat pocket. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt quiet, like a storm had passed, and all that was left was rain on the windows. But that rain fed something. In early February, I returned to Millstone for a few days. My mother's hands were rougher, her eyes softer. My father was still fixing engines. In the barn, his laughter echoing between timber beams. You really own it now? He asked over dinner, sipping warm cider. I do, I said. He leaned back in his chair. Well, don't let the power make you cruel. You weren't raised that way. I know, Pac, my mother added gently. But don't let kindness make you weak either. I smiled. That's the trick, isn't it? That weekend, I went walking through the woods I used to play in as a child. I found the old pond where I once fell through the ice and my father had to wade in to pull me out. I stood there, bundled in a long wool coat, watching the surface shimmer in the winter light. This place made me. This town. This family. Bradley broke my heart, but Millstone rebuilt it. Back in Providence, I began the real work. I reopened the North Dock Mill, which had been shut for years. I rehired dozens of former staff and stitched together a local production line that reduced shipping costs and raised morale. People began calling it the Emma Revival. Investors came sniffing around in March. Newspapers wrote articles with headlines like, "Small Town Girl Resurrects Failing Textile Giant, Secretary to CEO, The Rise of Emma Caldwell." I ignored them. I didn't do it for headlines. I did it for me. Still, I cut out one article and pinned it above my desk. Just one. Spring arrived in Providence with the kind of breeze that lifted curtains and old memories alike. The snow had melted into muddy rivers, and daffodils bloomed in the churchyard behind the mill. Business was steady, now steady enough to breathe. Not quite enough to relax. I spent long hours at the office, poring over production reports, signing vendor contracts, and walking the factory floor just to hear the rhythm of looms again. The sound of weaving it reminded me that something broken could still be made whole, one thread at a time. But with growth came ghosts. On a Thursday morning in late April, Mrs. Graves, the old payroll clerk, knocked softly on my door. "Emma," she said, voice hesitant, "someone's here to see you. Says he's your cousin." I frowned. Cousin? A moment later, the door opened, and in walked a man I hadn't seen in over a decade. Joseph Caldwell, my father's younger brother's son. He looked older than I remembered, lean and weary, with sunburned skin and boots covered in red dust. "Emma," he said with a nod, "heard about what you did. I'm surprised word traveled all the way to Montana." I replied, unsure of his tone. Word travels faster when money's involved. He stepped closer and sat without asking. "I heard. You're running the place now. Must be pulling in what, 40, 50 grand a year?" I folded my arms. "What do you want, Joe?" He didn't flinch. "An opportunity. I've got an idea, textiles for military gear. I know people in supply procurement. We partner you. Fund I sell." "I don't fund people who vanish from family funerals," I said coldly. Joe laughed, not kindly. "Still a firecracker." I stood. "And you're still a grifter." He raised his hands. All right. Just thought I'd ask." When he left, I locked the office door and leaned against it, heart pounding. Family didn't always mean love. Sometimes it meant reminders of who you were and who you could have become. The following weekend, I visited Walter Hargrove's grave. It sat at the edge of Elmwood Cemetery, tucked between an old cherry tree and a broken angel statue. I brought a single white rose and knelt on the damp grass. "You believed in the company more than anyone," I said aloud. "I hope I've done right by it. And by you." A breeze blew gently, almost like an answer. I stayed for a while, watching the sunlight filter through the branches, casting shifting patterns on the marble. Back at the mill, I began sorting through the old inventory room, the one Bradley never touched. Behind rusted bolts and outdated sample books, I found a locked chest. It took me a full day and 2 bent hairpins to get it open. Inside was a stack of ledgers, letters, and a sealed envelope, marked "To whom it may concern." Curious, I opened it. It was a letter from Walter, dated August 12, 1946, just months before his death. "To the one reading this, if you found this, then the company is in your hands. I built Hargrove Textiles with calloused hands and sleepless nights, and I always feared I'd die before finding someone worthy to take it forward. If you're that person, protect it. Don't let the suits turn it hollow. Build things that matter, not just things that sell. And if you ever fall in love with someone in this office, be smarter than I was. Love is beautiful, but power is blinding. Choose wisely." Walter Hargrove. I read it 3 times before folding it back and slipping it into my desk drawer. Walter had known. Somehow, he had seen the storm coming and tried to leave a map. By early May, things were changing again. A tall gentleman named Miles Whitaker, dressed in a dark vest and a traveling coat, arrived unannounced with a briefcase and a curious smile. "I represent the Burla Wool Syndicate," he said. "We're interested in a long-term partnership." I tilted my head. "Why now?" He smirked. "Because you turned a dying factory into the talk of New England. And because women like you don't come around twice." We spent 3 hours in discussion. He was sharp, forward, and respectful, everything Bradley wasn't. And he listened when I spoke. By the time he left, I had a proposal in hand and something I hadn't felt in months. Possibility, not hope. That's too fragile, but momentum. That night, I walked home under a sky filled with stars. Providence was quiet, the street lamps humming low, the streets wet with spring dew, and I realized something. I didn't miss Bradley. I didn't hate him either. I had outgrown him, and now, I was ready for what came next. The proposal from Miles Whitaker sat on my desk for 2 full days. It was generous. Too generous. A 10-year contract with quarterly purchase guarantees, first rights to our new winter line, and a shared marketing initiative that would spread our designs across 3 states. On paper, it was everything I'd dreamed of, but in the quiet of my office, lit by oil lamp and the ticking of the grandfather clock behind me, something didn't sit right. I'd seen too many good deals ruin better people. So I dug deeper. That Friday morning, I sent Ruthie, our best record keeper, to the local records office. By sundown, she returned with a folder of newspaper clippings, business licenses, and freight documents. And that's when it hit me like a snow-laden branch. Miles Whitaker wasn't just a businessman. He was once Bradley Hargrove's college roommate. I stared at the clippings for nearly an hour. In one, they were laughing in matching varsity blazers at a Yale alumni dinner, arm in arm, drink in hand. Another showed them shaking hands outside a newly opened boutique in Manhattan, dated 5 years back. He'd changed his image, grown a beard, lost some hair, but it was him. My chest tightened. What was this? A new trick? Another game? I spent that night piecing together everything Miles had said, his knowledge of our factory, his subtle digs at Bradley, the way he offered exactly what I'd been hoping for, as if reading from a script. Was this a trap, a test, or something worse? The next morning, I confronted him. I arranged for him to return for contract negotiations and invited him to meet me privately in the old dye room, quiet, empty, and painted with the scent of cloth and time. He arrived smiling, briefcase in hand. "Emma," he said warmly, "wasn't expecting this location, but it's charming." I didn't offer tea. I didn't sit. I opened the folder and placed it on the work table between us. "Let's talk about Bradley Hargrove." His smile faltered. "Emma, don't Emma me," I said, my voice low. "You were his roommate, his business partner. I have photos, shipping ledgers, and proof of shared financing. So let's skip the part where you pretend this is a coincidence." He exhaled and closed the folder gently. "All right, you want the truth? I deserve it." Miles leaned back against a stack of cloth bolts. "Bradley approached me before Christmas. He was desperate, told me the company was crumbling, said he needed a fallback, someone he trusted to scoop up the pieces, in case it all went sideways." I crossed my arms. "So he sent you in to pick up the scraps?" "At first," he admitted. "But I didn't expect to find you holding the threads." His eyes met mine, steady and without malice. "I read everything. Saw what you did, how you outmaneuvered him, and I told him to go to hell." I blinked. Bradley was arrogant. Miles continued. "He assumed I'd be his net, but watching what you've built here, how the workers respect you, how efficient this place runs, I realized I didn't want the scraps. I wanted to invest in you." My guard remained up. "You expect me to believe you just switched sides?" He nodded. "Because I saw something better than Bradley. Something smarter. You took a joke of a gift card and turned it into an empire. I don't want to steal your work, I want to join it, but I won't lie again. So, the choice is yours." For a long time, neither of us spoke. I studied him. The creases around his eyes weren't just from smiling, they were from decisions, from mistakes, maybe even regrets. He had lied by omission, yes, but he'd come clean when cornered. And he hadn't pressed me, not once. "Leave the contract," I said, voice level. "Let me read it again, carefully, and if I still see merit, we'll talk next week." Miles nodded, gathered his coat, and left without another word. That night, I sat by my apartment window, watching the rain streak down the glass. In the distance, train whistles echoed, and I could almost hear my younger self boarding that first ride to Providence, wide-eyed, heart full of dreams, stomach full of nerves. I had been naive then, but I wasn't anymore. Whether Miles was telling the truth or not, I had learned one powerful thing. I didn't need someone to save me. I had already saved myself. The proposal from Miles Whitaker sat on my desk for 2 full days. It was generous. Too generous. A 10-year contract with quarterly purchase guarantees, first rights to our new winter line, and a shared marketing initiative that would spread our designs across 3 states. On paper, it was everything I'd dreamed of, but in the quiet of my office, lit by oil lamp and the ticking of the grandfather clock behind me, something didn't sit right. I'd seen too many good deals ruin better people. So I dug deeper. That Friday morning, I sent Ruthie, our best record keeper, to the local records office. By sundown, she returned with a folder of newspaper clippings, business licenses, and freight documents. And that's when it hit me like a snow-laden branch. Miles Whitaker wasn't just a businessman. He was once Bradley Hargrove's college roommate. I stared at the clippings for nearly an hour. In one, they were laughing in matching varsity blazers at a Yale alumni dinner, arm in arm, drink in hand. Another showed them shaking hands outside a newly opened boutique in Manhattan, dated 5 years back. He'd changed his image, grown a beard, lost some hair, but it was him. My chest tightened. What was this? A new trick? Another game? I spent that night piecing together everything Miles had said, his knowledge of our factory, his subtle digs at Bradley, the way he offered exactly what I'd been hoping for, as if reading from a script. Was this a trap, a test, or something worse? The next morning, I confronted him. I arranged for him to return for contract negotiations and invited him to meet me privately in the old dye room, quiet, empty, and painted with the scent of cloth and time. He arrived smiling, briefcase in hand. "Emma," he said warmly, "wasn't expecting this location, but it's charming." I didn't offer tea. I didn't sit. I opened the folder and placed it on the work table between us. "Let's talk about Bradley Hargrove." His smile faltered. "Emma, don't Emma me," I said, my voice low. "You were his roommate, his business partner. I have photos, shipping ledgers, and proof of shared financing. So let's skip the part where you pretend this is a coincidence." He exhaled and closed the folder gently. "All right, you want the truth? I deserve it." Miles leaned back against a stack of cloth bolts. "Bradley approached me before Christmas. He was desperate, told me the company was crumbling, said he needed a fallback, someone he trusted to scoop up the pieces, in case it all went sideways." I crossed my arms. "So he sent you in to pick up the scraps?" "At first," he admitted. "But I didn't expect to find you holding the threads." His eyes met mine, steady and without malice. "I read everything. Saw what you did, how you outmaneuvered him, and I told him to go to hell." I blinked. Bradley was arrogant. Miles continued. "He assumed I'd be his net. But watching what you've built here, how the workers respect you, how efficient this place runs, I realized I didn't want the scraps. I wanted to invest in you." My guard remained up. "You expect me to believe you just switched sides?" He nodded. "Because I saw something better than Bradley. Something smarter. You took a joke of a gift card and turned it into an empire. I don't want to steal your work, I want to join it, but I won't lie again. So, the choice is yours." For a long time, neither of us spoke. I studied him. The creases around his eyes weren't just from smiling, they were from decisions, from mistakes, maybe even regrets. He had lied by omission, yes, but he'd come clean when cornered. And he hadn't pressed me, not once. "Leave the contract," I said, voice level. "Let me read it again, carefully. And if I still see merit, we'll talk next week." Miles nodded, gathered his coat, and left without another word. That night, I sat by my apartment window, watching the rain streak down the glass. In the distance, train whistles echoed, and I could almost hear my younger self boarding that first ride to Providence, wide-eyed, heart full of dreams, stomach full of nerves. I had been naive then, but I wasn't anymore. Whether Miles was telling the truth or not, I had learned one powerful thing. I didn't need someone to save me. I had already saved myself. It was mid-June when the first fire started, not the kind that burns buildings, but the kind that spreads through rumors, whispers, and letters without return addresses. It began with a newspaper clipping slipped under the factory door. No note, no sender, just a folded article titled, "Hargrove Textiles, a Woman's Victory, or a Temporary Rebellion." Inside, the writer questioned my rise, claimed I had emotionally manipulated my way into ownership, that I'd exploited holiday generosity and used feminine charm to dismantle a generational empire. The article ended with the sentence, "Success built on vengeance rarely sustains." I read it once, then again, and then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was tired. The world didn't know how to write about women who didn't fall apart after heartbreak. It only knew how to spin strength into scandal. That night, I pinned the article on the factory's breakroom board right next to our summer production calendar. I drew a red circle around the phrase "temporary rebellion" and wrote beneath it, "Watch us prove them wrong." The next challenge came in the form of a surprise inspection. The Providence City Textile Board, men in gray suits, holding clipboards like swords, poking at thread quality, measuring fabric tension, counting safety pins like they were gold coins. They went room to room, whispering among themselves, asking obscure questions. We'll be back with our decision. One of them said flatly. By that evening, a notice was posted to the town bulletin, pending license review, Hargrove Textiles. I knew this wasn't random. This was retaliation. Political pressure from the old Hargrove circles, Bradley's remaining allies, trying to grind my success down with paper and policy. They underestimated me. Again, I reached out to a name I had kept in my back pocket for months, Judith Bellamy, a no-nonsense labor rights attorney from Boston, who once defended immigrant weavers during the 39 wage protests. I'd met her years ago at a town hall where I had taken notes in the back row. She remembered me. Emma Caldwell? She said, over the phone. You're the girl with the stitched velvet dress. Yes, I said. And now I'm the woman whose business they're trying to bury. She arrived the next day in a cobalt coat, storm gray eyes, and heels sharper than some knives. Within hours, she dissected the city inspector's complaint, filed 2 counter affidavits, and threatened to pull 3 political favors that left their office scrambling. I'm not here to win, she told me. I'm here to remind them what a fight feels like. By the end of the week, the review was dropped. No fine, no delay, no apology. But it didn't matter. I had survived. Fire again. Late that Saturday, as I walked the halls of the factory alone, I stopped at the pattern table. A single beam of moonlight came through the skylight above, illuminating the outline of a new summer design. A blouse I had sketched the night Bradley announced his engagement to Clarissa. Back then, it was just cloth and pain. Now, it was strength, stitched into cotton. The next morning, I gathered the team on the factory floor. We didn't hold meetings on Sundays. But this time, it was different. I want to start something, I told them, a scholarship fund for the daughters of our workers, for girls who dream in color and cloth and possibility. There was silence at first, then a wave of nods, then applause. Mrs. Graves stepped forward, placing her hand on mine. I'll be your first donor, she said softly. We called it the Threads of Tomorrow Fund. By summer's end, we had raised enough for 3 full scholarships. Applications poured in from as far as Lowell and Springfield. Girls with ink-stained fingers and eyes full of hope, and every time I read one, I saw a bit of myself. One evening, sitting at my desk, I opened my old journal, the one I hadn't touched since the Christmas party. I flipped to the last entry. I had written, he gave me a gift card. I gave myself the world. I added one more line below it, and now, I give it back to those who need it most, because revenge, real revenge, isn't just about taking something back, it's about becoming something so powerful they can't take anything from you ever again. By late August, the scent of summer was fading into the crisp gold of early fall. Providence's trees had begun their slow, fiery transformation. The roads shimmered with scattered leaves, and the factory windows framed skies that looked like paintings. One evening, as I walked past the cutting room, I paused at the sound of soft humming. Inside, a girl no older than 17 was laying out fabric, her fingers fast but gentle. She wore scuffed boots, her hair tied with a red ribbon. Names: June Wallace, Mrs. Graves whispered behind me. One of our scholarship girls. She's been coming early every day. Says she wants to learn from the best. I stepped in quietly. You ever handled silk crepe before? I asked her. She looked up, startled, then nodded shyly. Not yet, ma'am, but I read your pattern notes on the summer blouse. I think I understand the tension needed along the seams. My heart swelled with something I hadn't felt in years, hope that had grown roots. You keep working like that, June, I said, and one day, you'll be sitting in this office. Her eyes lit up like dawn. You think so? I don't think, I replied. I know. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail with elegant handwriting and a return address I hadn't seen in over a year. Bradley Hargrove. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Emma, I've left Providence. I sold the rest of my holdings. I'm going west to California. I've decided to start over. I won't pretend to apologize for everything, but I will admit that you were always more than I gave you credit for. You beat me, and part of me is glad you did. Don't waste time hating me. I already did that job for both of us. Brad, no return request. No address to write back to. I folded the letter and placed it with Clarissa's in my drawer of ghosts. Bradley was never going to say the words I needed. But that was okay. I didn't need his apology to live. In mid-September, we held our first ever founders celebration at the factory. The floor was cleared of sewing tables, replaced by long wooden benches and a hand-built stage. The windows were strung with golden lights, and a photograph of Walter Hargrove stood at the center of a tribute table. The workers brought food, music, their children. I gave a small speech about resilience, about the threads that hold us together even when everything else falls apart. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was warm, sincere, the kind that fills you rather than deafens you. Afterward, I sat on the edge of the stage, watching them dance, watching June spin in her ribbon hair, watching Mrs. Graves sip lemonade beside her husband, watching the factory not as a business but as a heartbeat. Miles Whitaker never returned, and I never needed him to. Sometimes, the best choices are the ones you walk away from. That Sunday, I visited Millstone again. My parents were waiting with fresh cider and cornbread. Pa had a new gray in his beard, and Ma had finished sewing a patchwork quilt she'd been working on since winter. We sat on the porch as the sun went down. "You seem quieter," my father said. Not said quiet, my mother added. Just full. "I think I am," I admitted. "Full of what I never thought I'd have again." "Peace?" Ma asked. "No," I said with a smile. "Pride." I returned to Providence and stood once more in the exact spot where I had first opened Bradley's Christmas envelope, the one that changed everything. It was an accident that he gave it to me. It was a joke to him, but to me, it had been a match. And I had burned down everything false and built something true from the ashes. They say revenge burns the soul, but mine had only cleared the fog. Winter returned to Providence like a memory, quiet, silver, and laced with sharp edges. The snow came early that year, blanketing the factory roof in white. Inside, the hum of looms and laughter continued as if time had never moved. It was nearly a year to the day since I received that gift card, since Bradley kissed Clarissa under the mistletoe, since I stood in a linen dress stitched with the last of my dignity and smiled through heartbreak. 12 months, 1,000 transformations, and now I stood in my office, overlooking the snow-covered streets, holding an invitation in my hands. Annual Chamber of Commerce Winter Banquet honoring local business innovation. December 23 yard. They were giving me an award, a plaque, maybe a speech, maybe polite applause from the very same people who had once whispered that I was just a secretary with ambition and pretty eyes. I had half a mind to decline. But then I remembered the girls June, Lana, Mara, 3 young scholarship recipients now learning the trade with skill and heart. I remembered how each of them had once believed they didn't belong. This wasn't just about me anymore. So I accepted. The banquet. I wore a deep blue velvet gown, one I had designed myself, handmade, like everything else in my life now. I stood on a stage under crystal chandeliers as people in tuxedos and fur coats clapped and watched. When they handed me the microphone, I paused before speaking. "I was given a gift last Christmas," I began. A gift card, meant as a joke, an afterthought. Some guests chuckled politely. What it turned into was a lesson, not just in business, in value, in power, in being underestimated, and in how sometimes the most broken things leave behind the strongest foundations. I looked out over the crowd, eyes scanning for familiar faces, and for a moment, I thought I saw Clarissa Maddox near the back, her head bowed respectfully. But when I looked again, she was gone. No matter. I smiled, too. Every woman who's been laughed at, overlooked, passed by for promotion, or praised only for how she looks, this award is yours too. Let them keep their golden trophies. I raised my glass. I built something better, my life. The crowd rose. Applause thundered. I walked off the stage without looking back. That night, I returned to my apartment, lit by the soft glow of candles and a crackling fireplace. Outside, snow fell in thick flakes, muffling the city's noise. The room was warm, safe, mine. I sat at my desk and opened the old journal for the final time. I turned to the last page and wrote, "He gave me a gift card for Christmas, so I bought the company, rebuilt the future, and never needed him again." Revenge isn't rage, it's rising, and sometimes it's quiet as snow. As I closed the journal, I heard a soft knock at my door. It was Mrs. Graves, wrapped in her wool coat, holding a small box. "Delivery came for you at the factory," she said, handing it over. No return address. Inside was a music box, antique, polished wood. When I turned the key, it played a slow, simple melody I hadn't heard since I was a child. A note inside said, For the little girl who kept dancing, even after the music stopped, there was no signature. But I didn't need one. Some stories don't need an epilogue. The end questions to reflect on. Do you think Emma was right to reject Miles Whitaker, even after he admitted the truth? Was Bradley's final letter an act of closure or manipulation in disguise? Could Emma have taken a less vengeful path and still come out stronger? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment. Shadow of Revenge.